He's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and the gayest presidential candidate who isn't Rudy Giuliani in drag. Please welcome Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you've talked a lot about the challenge of being gay and coming out of the closet. And you know, one thing about gay people, myself included, you know, there's a quality that a lot of gay people talk about, which is, especially when they're in the closet, that there's this need to kind of be perfect, to be the teacher's pet, to get the accolades, to get all the credit, as if there's some ledger being kept. Was there a part of you that ever thought, yeah, I'm gay, but I got to make sure I, you know, talk about my Christian faith, and yeah, I'm gay, but I'm going to join the military, so that, yeah, I may be gay, but I'm a gay fucking troop. Was that ever in your thinking that because you were ambitious, because you wanted to do big things, because you thought you were this incredibly talented person, which you are, that, you know what, I got to make sure that I'm putting these pieces together so that even though I'm gay, whether I'm fully conscious of it or not, that I can have all these other accolades to kind of get me to where I want to go?
I don't know. I mean, I think if that kind of stuff goes on, it happens so deep that you may not even be following it, right? I think it is true that you feel a different level of pressure to be the most, the best, the strongest, especially if there's something gnawing at you that makes you think that there's something about you that's wrong or off, right? And a part of it was different, which is more practical, which is just the simple fact that you know, I had a little more maybe bandwidth because dating wasn't available for me for as long as I wasn't willing to be out, right? So, you know, in hindsight, it's nuts that I was mayor and I was a reservist. I deployed to Afghanistan in the middle of being mayor. Like, if I had any kind of personal life, I think none of that would be on the table. And yet you find places for your energy, right? You could even argue find places for your love to go if it's not going into a relationship. And who knows all the different ways that kind of finds its way out. I'm conscious now of like literally being on the couch here, and don't know that I'm that good at like plunging into my own kind of motivations or backstory that way. But there's no question that so many gay people feel that pressure, and it I think propels us in different ways.
So, you know, in the most recent debate, I believe, or maybe the one before last, there's been several. You know, you were asked about your performance with black voters, and you talked about how you were very clear, and I think you got some unfair blowback for these comments, but you were very clear. You weren't comparing the experience. You weren't saying that being gay was like being black, or that the problems facing gay people or anything like the problems facing black people historically in the present, what have you, but that you had some access to what it's like to feel marginalized. And in the moment, I watched that and I thought, I'll be honest, I thought, I'm not sure this is going to play. Mm-hmm. And the reason I didn't think it was going to play is because there's this sense that despite having said so, that you're not an outsider, that you don't have this experience of being an outsider, and that even in that moment when you talked about it in terms of laws, that you saw people debating your rights as a human being. Do you feel as though you have been an outsider?
I mean, part of what I was trying to get across, and I have no idea whether it played well, but it wasn't just the experience of exclusion, but also the experience of having my rights expanded by coalitions of people who included people like me and people not like me, and understanding how that kind of feeds back to an obligation I must have to make myself useful to others who, even if they're in the lead fighting for their own rights, like need people not like them at their side, cheering them on or fighting with them. No, I mean, the point is, I think we all need to reach into whatever we do know of feeling like you don't fit. And a lot of times it's the things that make you fit in one context that wind up amounting to your style when you walk out to a different place, if that makes sense. So I think growing up in my community, I felt both of it and not of it in a lot of ways, which is one of the reasons I left, right? That and the fact that the message that everybody got growing up in my part of Indiana was that success meant getting out. And then no sooner did I get out and find myself at a place like Harvard, where all of the things that made me weird back home, like being kind of intellectual and liberal, were accepted or even celebrated. And then you also realize that you're from somewhere, right? I never felt more Indiana than when I got to Harvard, just like I never felt more American than when I got to Oxford. So the very same environment that you're at odds with when you're in it, you begin to own it when you step out of it for a second. And I think we all have that relationship with our communities, with our country, often with our families. And I think there's a particular flavor of it for queer people because of all the different ways that fact puts you at odds with your community, sometimes your family and your country.
One of the fights that's been going on right now is over whether or not certain programs should be universal. And one thing you said early in the campaign was we shouldn't give in to Republican arguments. We should decide what we think is best and do what we think is best because they're going to call us socialists. They're going to tar us no matter what. And, I think you've gotten some unfair criticism on your higher ed proposal because it is incredibly ambitious. It would be more progressive than anything proposed in any previous campaign. And yet, you face criticism because it isn't universal, right? It is means tested. Right. And even though you would cover, 80% of students, there's still people that wouldn't be helped. But you said we shouldn't be paying for college for the children of millionaires. Do you believe that it's is it simply politically untenable to have a universal public college program, or do you actually believe it is worse policy to have a system that, say, taxes millionaires and billionaires a little bit more, but is available to everybody?
No, I believe what I do, not just politically, philosophically. I just think that this is an example of a benefit that we should target where it's going to make the biggest difference. Sure, yeah, a lot of our programs are universal, but there's a very simple and very big difference between K through 12 education and university education. And the simple difference is that we expect everybody to get through 12th grade. At least we hope everybody and want everybody to get through 12th grade. It's not the same with the university education. And look, there are some things that we means test and some things that we don't. I don't think anybody believes that the earned income tax credit shouldn't be means tested, right? I think that there's a limit on where we should be paying for all the way down to the last penny of somebody, especially if by definition we're talking about those in the higher income brackets, but also by virtue of the fact that they do have a college degree, will go on to be in a higher income bracket than those who didn't. So it's just a progressive, by my lights, it's a progressive idea that we should target those dollars because the reality is, no matter where you're raising the tax money from, and I get that the idea of how we pay for this on my competitor's plan, or on my plan for that matter, is largely taxes raised from rich people, right? But whether to spend them on rich people is a policy decision we make on every single policy that we initiate. And I believe that, things like national defense or interstate highways should be equally available to everybody. But something like university, I think it's fine if you're in that top 10%. I wish you well. I still wish you well. I just think you ought to pay your own tuition.
You are offering this idea of generational change. And yet for a lot of people, they see Warren, they see Bernie as being the more dramatic form of change that they're looking for. Are they wrong about that?
Well, I think it would be wrong to say that that's the only way to get real change. So, I would be the most progressive president in a half century. And you can agree with my positions or not, but they're pretty progressive, right? And yet I also consider it important not to chase all the way after the purity test or the extreme, especially at a moment where we have a chance to, and I'm not just talking about this politically, I'm saying in order to govern this really divided nation. Not that we're ever going to get most of the Trump hardcore, but that we hold together this amazing American majority that's ready to go on issue after issue after issue.
With the actual governing outcome of you versus Elizabeth Warren, does Elizabeth Warren's actual governing end up looking more progressive than your version of governing? Will she be further to the left in outcomes if she were to be president?
Well, no, because I think my governing strategy would be more likely to get the outcomes. Remember, however far we arrange ourselves on how far to go, 80% or 100%, this many trillion for healthcare versus that many trillion, it's multiplied by zero if it doesn't happen. And so at the end of the day, I think we share the goals, right? We share the goal of universal healthcare. We share the desire to make sure college cost is never a barrier for somebody who wants to go to college. Broadly, we're aligned as a party, actually, despite all the narratives. We're largely aligned on where we think things ought to go. And the really good news is, it's not just internal alignment among Democrats. There's a healthy American majority that's with us, even in conservative states.
if your proposition is forget how far left we go in the primary, the most important thing is who's going to get the most progressive policy done governing. Are some of the more centrist parts of the Democratic establishment and the fundraising and the donors, are they simply getting it wrong when they view you as a safer bet? In other words, like, is their idea of a Buttigieg administration as one that's more favorable to tech, let's say, which seems to be a conception largely held? Is that incorrect?
Well, I'm not trying to trick anybody. Like, if somebody is in business or they're wealthy and they're given to my campaign, I'd make it pretty clear to them that they're going to be more regulated and their taxes are going to go up. So I think that what's happening is that there are a lot of different things that motivate people to support a candidate. We're at, I think, 700,000 donors now. I don't know what each of them thinks on anything, right? And chances are, as with every voter and every supporter, even your strongest supporters usually disagree with you on some stuff and agree with you on some stuff. If somebody thinks that I'm going to just keep everything the same in our economy, then yes, they're mistaken. But I think I've been pretty clear about the changes I'm going to make and why we need them, whether it's the need to regulate big tech or the need to make sure that we actually return the sharing of the burden of the cost of government to a much fairer share that includes more for wealthy individuals and more for corporations. I'm pretty clear on what I'm going to do. And people, for whatever combinations of reasons, who believe I should be president, need to know when they're supporting me that they're supporting that.